Your phone buzzes with another overdue notice as you sit in your downtown Chicago apartment, the bitter taste of cold coffee mixing with that familiar knot in your stomach. Outside, the L train rumbles past your window, its metallic screech echoing the chaos in your head. The scent of rain on concrete drifts through the cracked window, and you can't shake this feeling that you're drowning in your own life. Not literally drowning, but that suffocating sensation when everything you've built feels like it's slipping through your fingers like water. Your laptop screen glows with unanswered emails, each one a reminder that despite all your hustle, all your networking, all your strategic planning, you're still struggling to keep your head above the surface. 2,000 years ago, a working-class fisherman experienced the exact same psychological phenomenon under extraordinary circumstances. His story contains a framework for understanding failure that Silicon Valley executive coaches charge six figures to teach, but most people completely miss the point. This lesson begins with accepting a counterintuitive truth. Sometimes we have to sink before we can discover what true stability actually looks like. We live in the most informed generation in human history, yet paradoxically the least equipped to navigate uncertainty. Your LinkedIn feed showcases curated success stories. That startup founder who just raised Series A, the consultant who landed the Fortune 500 client, the influencer who built a seven-figure business. Meanwhile, you're grinding through another Tuesday, questioning whether your degree was worth the student debt, whether your career trajectory makes sense, whether you're falling behind some invisible timeline that everyone else seems to understand. The constant hum of productivity culture tells us that optimization equals fulfillment, that the right system or framework will finally give us control over our outcomes. You've tried the morning routines, the time blocking, the goal-setting methodologies. Yet here you are, still feeling like you're walking on thin ice that could crack at any moment. This persistent anxiety about maintaining momentum reveals something profound about the modern American psyche. We've built our identity around the illusion of control, and when that illusion cracks, we interpret it as personal failure, rather than recognizing it as fundamentally human. Do you recognize this pattern? This exhausting cycle of building momentum only to watch it dissipate when you encounter real resistance? Whether you're in Manhattan grinding through startup culture or in small-town Iowa figuring out your next move after the plant closed, this experience transcends geography and demographics. Our parents' generation faced this during economic recessions. Our grandparents navigated it through world wars and social upheaval. Today we experience it through gig economy volatility, relationship fluidity in the age of dating apps, and the psychological weight of infinite choice in everything from career paths to Netflix selections. This fundamental vulnerability isn't a bug in the human experience. It's a feature that reveals something essential about our nature. The story I'm about to share comes from ancient Palestine, but it speaks directly to the psychological reality of modern American life. It's about a man who experienced both the ultimate high and the ultimate low within minutes of each other. And what he learned in that process fundamentally changed how he approached risk, failure, and personal growth. His insights offer a completely different framework for navigating the inevitable moments when your best laid plans start falling apart. This tension between aspiration and reality intensifies when you realize it's not just one area of your life that's unstable. It's the compound effect of multiple systems breaking down simultaneously. First, the career stagnation hits. Then, the relationship stress compounds it. Add financial pressure, and suddenly, you're dealing with a perfect storm of instability that makes you question your fundamental competence as an adult. You scroll through social media seeing everyone else apparently thriving while you're fighting just to maintain baseline functionality. The weight of American individualism presses down. If you're struggling, it must be because you're not working smart enough, not optimizing correctly, not executing at the level that success requires. That internal voice gets louder. Everyone else figured this out. Why can't you get your act together? The cultural narrative of meritocracy suggests that outcomes reflect character. So when outcomes start deteriorating, we internalize it as evidence of personal inadequacy. This psychological spiral is where most Americans get stuck, mistaking systemic challenges for individual failings, mistaking human vulnerability for personal weakness. But what if this entire framework is backwards? What if the moments when everything falls apart aren't evidence of your inadequacy, but glimpses into something much deeper about the nature of growth itself? If this resonates with something you're carrying right now, your like tells me we're walking the same path of understanding. 2 millennia ago, on the storm-tossed waters of the Sea of Galilee, A fisherman named Peter lived through the most paradoxical experience in human history. He simultaneously experienced the impossible and spectacular failure within the same moment. Peter wasn't a biblical superhero. He was a working-class guy dealing with economic uncertainty, family responsibilities, and the pressure to provide in a volatile political environment. Sound familiar? His story isn't about religious perfection, it's about psychological resilience and the counterintuitive relationship between vulnerability and strength. What happened to Peter on that stormy night contains principles that top-tier executive coaches now package as breakthrough methodologies, but the original source material offers something far more profound than modern self-help derivatives. You're about to discover how a first-century entrepreneur's experience with radical risk-taking and public failure can completely reframe how you approach the inevitable storms in your own professional and personal life. This isn't motivation, it's psychology. The Sea of Galilee sits in a geographical bowl surrounded by hills, creating perfect conditions for sudden, violent weather patterns that can transform calm waters into life-threatening chaos within minutes. Peter and his crew weren't weekend sailors. These were seasoned professionals who'd built their livelihood reading weather patterns, managing risk, and operating in high-stakes maritime environments. Think of them as the equivalent of long-haul truckers or commercial fishermen today. Blue-collar entrepreneurs who understood their trade intimately and had developed sophisticated risk management protocols through years of experience. The night in question, they were crossing the lake on direct orders from their mentor Jesus, who had gone alone into the mountains to pray. This context is crucial, because what you're about to hear isn't about amateur sailors getting in over their heads. These were professionals encountering something that challenged their core assumptions about how the world operates. Peter's response to this challenge reveals something profound about human psychology under extreme stress, and offers insights that remain relevant for anyone facing situations where their expertise feels suddenly inadequate. The storm hit with the characteristic violence of that geographical region, wind speeds that could flip commercial vessels, waves high enough to swamp experienced crews, conditions that would challenge even modern maritime technology. The wooden boat groaned under repeated impacts as walls of water crashed over the hull. These weren't gentle swells. We're talking about life-threatening weather that pushed these professional mariners to their operational limits. Peter's hands, already calloused from years of handling ropes and nets, began to blister as he fought the oars against currents trying to drive them into the rocky shoreline. The taste of salt spray mixed with the metallic tang of adrenaline-fueled fear. His soaked clothing clung to his body, adding weight and restricting movement when he needed maximum agility. In the midst of this crisis, they spotted something that defied every law of physics they understood: a human figure walking toward them across the churning surface of the water. Their first reaction was pure terror. It's a ghost, because what they were seeing simply couldn't exist within their framework of reality. Then they heard that familiar voice cutting through the chaos. "Don't be afraid, it's me, Jesus." Peter was about to make a decision that would reveal everything about his psychological makeup and offer timeless insights about how humans respond when faced with opportunities that exceed their current capabilities. Lord, if that's you, tell me to come to you on the water. Share in the comments if you've ever experienced something similar. That moment when you ask for the impossible, when you challenge your own limitations head on. Notice what Peter didn't ask for. He didn't ask Jesus to calm the storm. He didn't ask to be rescued. He asked to participate in the miracle. This reveals something fundamental about high performers. When confronted with someone operating at a level that exceeds their current capacity, their instinct isn't to seek safety. It's to seek elevation. "Come," Jesus replied. One word that would change everything. Peter swung his leg over the side of the boat. His crew watched him with the kind of horrified fascination you'd feel watching someone attempt a base jump without proper equipment. The churning water stretched below his feet. This was the ultimate moment of decision, the space between the security of the known and the risk of the unprecedented. Every entrepreneur, every creative professional, every person who's ever attempted something beyond their proven capabilities knows this exact psychological state. Peter was about to discover something about faith, failure, and human potential that remains one of the most instructive case studies in the psychology of peak performance under pressure. What happened next challenges every assumption about physical possibility. Peter's foot, the same foot that had only ever touched solid ground and wooden deck planks, made contact with the water's surface and didn't sink. The impossible became temporarily real. He took one step, then another, then another. Eyes locked on Jesus, Peter experienced something that few humans have ever encountered: the temporary suspension of natural limitations beneath his feet. Feel the texture of this moment, the unexpected firmness under his sandals, the rhythm of liquid that remained fluid but supported his weight like concrete. The storm continued raging around him. Waves still crashed and wind still howled, but Peter was literally walking on water. For several precious transcendent moments, Peter operated beyond the constraints of normal human capability. But then, and this is where the most crucial lesson emerges, his attention shifted. A particularly massive wave entered his peripheral vision. He became suddenly, viscerally aware of the absolute impossibility of what he was doing. Logic reasserted itself, and immediately, relentlessly, Peter began sinking into the same water that had been supporting him seconds earlier. "Lord, save me!" His cry pierced the storm-filled night. In an instant, he went from experiencing the miraculous to facing potential drowning. This transition from transcendence to crisis contains the key to understanding not just faith, but the psychology of human performance under extreme conditions. Jesus responded without hesitation. No lectures, no delay, no letting Peter learn the hard way. Immediately he reached out and caught Peter as he sank. "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" This wasn't condemnation. It was a coaching question designed to prompt reflection on the psychological mechanics of what had just occurred. Together, they climbed back into the boat, and only then did the storm subside. The other disciples were awestruck by the entire sequence. But for Peter, this was the beginning of a learning process that would transform his entire approach to risk, failure, and personal development. Because embedded in this paradoxical experience, walking on water followed by sinking, was a lesson about the nature of confidence, limitation, and growth that goes far deeper than most people realize. This night on the lake wouldn't be the last time Peter would experience dramatic failure after initial success. His trajectory would lead him to an even more devastating collapse, denying that he even knew Jesus 3 times in a row, before discovering that our greatest weaknesses can become our most solid foundations. This counterintuitive logic of transformation begins to reveal itself in that storm-tossed night, when an ordinary man briefly touched the extraordinary before rediscovering his fundamental fragility. The psychological principles at work in Peter's experience remain as relevant today as they were 2 millennia ago. Just as Peter left the security of his boat to venture onto uncertain waters, we constantly face moments of decision: stay in our comfort zone or risk the unknown. This analogy isn't metaphorical, it's viscerally real in contemporary American life. You know that moment when you had to choose between keeping the corporate job with benefits and launching the startup that could either revolutionize your industry or bankrupt you? Between maintaining a relationship that provided stability, but no growth, and taking the risk of ending it to find something more authentic? These waters we need to walk on today have different names: career pivots, vulnerable conversations, financial investments, geographic relocations, creative projects that expose us to criticism. Like Peter, we often begin with confidence and momentum. We leave our boat, that familiar zone of proven competence, driven by vision, intuition, or calculated analysis of opportunity. And for a while, miracle of miracles, we walk on water. Everything seems to align. We exceed our own expectations, surprise our critics, and begin to believe we've cracked some code that others haven't discovered. The initial traction validates our decision to take the risk, and we start to think we've found a new operational level that we can maintain indefinitely. If you're seeing these parallels take shape in your own experience, let me know in the comments. Because here's what happens with predictable regularity. Like Peter, our attention shifts. That business venture you launched with such enthusiasm, you start calculating the real burn rate, the competitive threats, the statistical probability of failure in your sector. That relationship you entered with such hope, you suddenly become acutely aware of the emotional risks, the practical complications, the vulnerability that sustained intimacy requires. That creative project that was energizing you, you realize the magnitude of the competition, the technical challenges, the potential for public rejection. And then, like Peter fixating on the waves instead of Jesus, you begin to sink, not physically, but psychologically, emotionally, professionally. That familiar sensation of water rising, panic setting in, that internal voice screaming, "This was a mistake. I should have stayed in my boat." I was naive to think this was possible. This pattern repeats in our lives with troubling frequency, and we typically interpret it as evidence of personal inadequacy rather than recognizing it as a fundamental feature of how growth actually works. The key insight isn't how to avoid sinking. It's understanding what sinking actually represents in the context of human development. But there's something most people completely miss about this story. A crucial detail that changes everything about how we interpret failure and vulnerability. We focus on the fact that Peter sank. On that moment when his faith failed, we turn it into a motivational lesson about the importance of maintaining focus on your goals. But that interpretation misses the essential point. It doesn't capture the deeper logic of what actually happened that night on the lake. Because the real question isn't, why did Peter sink? The real question is far more revolutionary and unsettling. How did Peter manage to walk on water even for a few moments? This reframing changes everything. It invites us to examine this experience from a completely different angle, more disturbing but infinitely more liberating. Get ready to see Peter's failure, and your own failures, under a totally new light that could transform your relationship with vulnerability and personal growth. Because what you're about to discover contradicts everything our achievement-oriented culture teaches us about success and failure, progress and regression, strength and weakness. Here's the revelation that changes everything. Peter didn't fail because he lacked faith. He failed because he returned to normal. Think about this. Walking on water is physically impossible. The laws of physics, human body density, gravitational force, everything dictates that Peter should have sunk immediately. Normal is sinking. Natural is going under. When Peter shifted his gaze from Jesus to fixate on the storm, he wasn't developing a new fear. He was simply remembering what he'd always known. Humans don't walk on water. The real miracle wasn't that he started sinking. The real miracle was that he ever managed not to sink. This understanding revolutionizes our relationship with failure. Our sinkings aren't anomalies in our growth process. They're returns to our baseline state of limitation. Our moments of walking on water are the true exceptions, the extraordinary gifts, the temporary suspensions of our normal constraints. This perspective radically transforms how we view our own cycles of progress and regression. Instead of flagellating ourselves when we sink, we can marvel at all those instances when we manage to walk on our impossible waters. This isn't about lowering standards. It's about understanding the actual mechanics of how human transcendence works and aligning our expectations with psychological reality rather than cultural mythology. If this perspective is changing how you see your own sinking moments, your like tells me we're touching something fundamental. This understanding liberates you from enormous psychological weight. You're not failing when you sink. You're being human. Your moments of doubt, anxiety, regression aren't character flaws. They're reminders of your baseline condition. What's extraordinary isn't these moments of vulnerability. What's extraordinary are all those instances when you transcend your habitual limitations, when you dare to leave your comfort zone, when you walk on your own impossible waters. This revelation invites us to celebrate our journeys differently. Instead of self-flagellation for backslides, we can marvel at our courageous leaps. Instead of shame about fears, we can honor our moments of bravery. Peter, after this experience, didn't become someone who never sinks. He became someone who understands the rhythm of alternating between transcendence and return to baseline, between the extraordinary and the ordinary. This paradoxical wisdom might be the most valuable learning we can extract from his experience on the storm-tossed waters of Galilee. It completely reframes how we navigate our own inevitable storms, setbacks, and cycles of expansion and contraction in both professional and personal contexts. Now examine your own life through this new framework. Identify your personal, water-walking moments, those periods when you transcended your normal limitations, surprised your network and yourself with your capabilities or courage. Maybe it was that presentation where you overcame your public speaking anxiety to deliver something that changed how your team approached a project. That negotiation where you advocated for yourself despite your conflict avoidance tendencies. That moment you expressed authentic feelings despite your fear of rejection. Reconnect with these experiences. Feel the texture of those moments, that sensation of being carried by something larger than your habitual fears, that unexpected clarity in high-pressure situations, that flow state where complex challenges felt manageable. Then identify your sinking episodes, those returns to limiting patterns, moments when fear reclaimed control, when old mental habits caught up with you again. Instead of viewing these as personal failures, begin recognizing them as reminders of your baseline humanity. This shift in perspective transforms your relationship with your own cycles of growth and regression. You stop torturing yourself for being human and start developing more realistic expectations for sustainable progress. First practice, create your water walking journal. Every evening for 15 days, document one moment from that day when you exceeded your normal limitations, even imperceptibly. This could be as simple as initiating a difficult conversation, attempting a new approach on a project, or maintaining composure in a stressful situation. The goal isn't cataloging heroic achievements, but developing sensitivity to these micro-transcendences of daily life. Feel the texture of these moments, the lighter quality of breath in your chest, that sense of fluidity in your movements, that mental clarity that feels different from your baseline state. Second practice. When you experience sinking, a return to limiting patterns, instead of self-criticism, ask yourself, what did my attention fixate on that made me forget my capacity? Like Peter looking at the waves instead of Jesus, identify what captured your focus and reconnected you to your habitual limitations. This awareness develops your ability to navigate more consciously between states of expansion and contraction without the added suffering of self-judgment. If you're planning to apply this understanding of expansion-contraction alternation, write "I'll apply it" as a commitment to yourself. Third practice, develop your attentional redirection muscle. When you feel yourself starting to sink, when anxiety, doubt, or fear begin to dominate, instead of fighting these sensations, deliberately redirect your attention to something that reconnects you with your resources. This might be conscious breathing, recalling a past success, or simply observing your immediate environment with curiosity. This practice doesn't aim to eliminate vulnerability moments, but to reduce the time you spend submerged in them. Fourth practice, share this understanding. Like Peter, who became a support for others after integrating this lesson, identify someone in your circle who's navigating their own storms and share with them your perspective on the natural alternation between breakthroughs and setbacks. This transmission consolidates your own learning while creating authentic connections within your community. Teaching others what you're learning is one of the most effective ways to deepen your own integration. Let's anticipate the resistance you'll encounter applying this perspective. First obstacle, your social environment may not understand this acceptance of vulnerability. We live in a culture that values the image of constant success, permanent control, linear growth. Publicly accepting your sinkings might be misinterpreted as weakness or defeatism, especially in professional contexts where admitting struggle can feel like career suicide. Solution: distinguish internal acceptance from external expression. You can integrate this understanding personally without necessarily broadcasting it publicly. Second obstacle: your own habits of perfectionism and self-criticism. After years of judging yourself harshly for vulnerabilities, adopting a more benevolent approach requires consistency and patience with yourself. Solution: treat this transition as relearning, not instant revolution. Celebrate small progress in your relationship with your own imperfections. Third obstacle: confusion between acceptance and resignation. This understanding doesn't invite passivity, but wiser activism that honors your natural rhythms of expansion and contraction, instead of fighting them uselessly. It's about working with your psychology instead of against it. This integration gradually transforms your daily experience. You begin savoring your momentum moments differently. Instead of taking them for granted, you recognize them as temporary gifts, precious suspensions of your habitual limitations. You feel that gratitude rising in your chest when you realize you're walking on water in some area of your life. Simultaneously, your vulnerability periods lose their dramatic charge. They become familiar reminders of your baseline humanity, invitations to self-compassion rather than self-flagellation. You develop that valuable capacity to say, I'm sinking. That's normal. That's my default state. Now what might help me regain my buoyancy? This approach liberates considerable energy previously wasted on resistance and guilt. You discover that your cycles become more fluid, your recoveries faster, your breakthroughs more authentic because they're no longer motivated by escape from vulnerability, but by natural expression of your potential. This internal transformation radiates into your relationships and projects, creating a virtuous cycle of authenticity and sustainable growth. You stop fighting your own nature and learn to dance with it. leading to more consistent performance and genuine confidence that doesn't depend on maintaining an impossible standard of constant optimization. The central teaching of Peter's experience transcends religious boundaries to touch something universally human: our relationship with vulnerability and growth. We've discovered that our sinkings aren't anomalies in our personal development, but returns to our baseline condition. Our extraordinary moments, when we walk on the water of our fears and limitations, are the true exceptions, the temporary gifts that punctuate our human journey. This revolutionary understanding liberates us from the exhausting pressure to maintain constant optimal performance. It reconciles us with our cyclical nature, made of surges and retreats, expansions and contractions. Peter, after that night on the lake, didn't become immune to failure. He developed a wiser relationship with his own limits and possibilities. He learned to navigate more fluidly between his moments of transcendence and his reminders of humanity. This paradoxical wisdom constitutes perhaps the most precious learning we can integrate, not the elimination of our vulnerabilities, but their transformation into gateways for deeper authenticity and more sustainable growth. It completely changes how we experience our inevitable ups and downs, setbacks and breakthroughs in both professional and personal contexts. Share this video with someone who needs this ancient wisdom, that person who judges themselves too harshly for their sinkings, who exhausts themselves trying to maintain an image of permanent control, who's forgotten to celebrate their moments of walking on water. Durable integration of this perspective requires conscious daily practice. Each morning before diving into your activities, take 30 seconds to reconnect with this truth. You are a fundamentally limited and vulnerable being, and it's precisely this condition that makes extraordinary your moments of transcendence. This morning recognition transforms your relationship with your day. Instead of expecting constant peak performance from yourself, you welcome with gratitude each instant when you transcend your habitual limitations. This practice progressively develops your capacity to live with more lightness and self-compassion. It cultivates that paradoxical wisdom that simultaneously honors your vulnerabilities and your potentials, creating optimal conditions for authentic and sustainable growth. You stop fighting against your own nature and learn to work in harmony with your psychological reality rather than against cultural expectations of impossible consistency. This understanding naturally creates more authentic connections with those around you. When you stop pretending to have everything under control, you authorize others to do the same. Your conversations gain depth, your relationships gain sincerity. You discover that special joy of sharing your sinkings with friends who understand, and celebrating together your moments of walking on water. This informal community of people who have integrated this wisdom becomes an ecosystem of mutual support. You feel that warmth in your chest when someone shares with you their own cycles of vulnerability and transcendence, that visceral recognition of shared humanity. These exchanges create social fabric more resistant to the pressures of performance and comparison that characterize our era. In coffee shops in Brooklyn or Denver, in co-working spaces in Austin or Seattle, the aroma of artisanal coffee now mixes with more authentic conversations where social masks can drop without fear of judgment. This shared authenticity transforms your relationships into refuges against the storms of modern existence. You realize everyone's figuring it out as they go, and there's profound relief in that mutual recognition of beautiful human imperfection. Subscribe and hit the notification bell to continue this exploration of ancient wisdom applied to contemporary challenges. Because Peter's story on the lake was just the prelude to an even more profound transformation. In our next episode, we'll discover how this same Peter, the man who sank in the Galilean waters, navigated through the most explosive conflict in early church history. A major theological disagreement that threatened to tear apart the young Christian community, and how the wisdom born from his own failures enabled him to find a solution that reconciled seemingly irreconcilable positions. This lesson on community conflict resolution resonates especially in our polarized era, where disagreements rapidly escalate into permanent ruptures. You'll discover the practical principles Peter applied to transform a community crisis into an opportunity for collective growth, tools you can adapt to your own relational tensions, whether family, professional, or social. This continuation of our exploration awaits you. It's about transforming division into connection, conflict into mutual growth, and disagreement into deeper understanding. Subscribe not as just another follower, but as a fellow traveler in this pursuit of ancient wisdom that transforms modern lives. Peter's experience reminds us of a liberating truth. You're not failing when you experience moments of vulnerability. You're being profoundly human. Your sinkings aren't character defects but reminders of your baseline condition that make even more precious your moments of transcendence. This perspective radically transforms your relationship with your own cycles of growth and regression, creating conditions for self-compassion that liberates your creative energy. In our next episode, we'll explore how Peter applied this wisdom, born from failure to resolve the Jerusalem conflict, when Peter saved the church from catastrophic division. Click on the video that will appear on screen to discover how a man transformed by his own falls became an architect of reconciliation. Your personal growth is a continuous story, not an isolated event, and that story continues now. The journey of wisdom never stops, and neither should your commitment to becoming who you're meant to be.